You're a member of society, you have ideas about how your society should be run, and you want to make sure that you make the best choice for yourself and for your city and for your province and for your country.
I'm Sean Lyons, and welcome to Civic School. This is our limited series where we answer your questions about Canadian government and politics. It's our effort to give you all the tools you need to exercise your rights and your power as a Canadian citizen. We cannot say it enough. There are no stupid questions or answers here. This is all about the information. We want to find out what you know, what you don't know, and what you don't know about the system. I'm not going to ask you to take my word for anything, so we bring in the experts to answer those questions. And we decided this time around, let's go to an actual school. Took our cameras up to the Trafalgar High School for Girls in Montreal, and I sat down with teacher Libby Fainsibler. Started out by asking her what she does to get her own teenage students interested and involved.
Well, we were really lucky this year to have an American election, and since they're so interested in the U.S. and what's happening in the U.S., I started in the fall to talk to them about the U.S. elections and how their American system is different from the Canadian system. And so we learned a little bit about that in the fall, and now, since the election's coming up, we started zeroing in more on what's happening here in Canada and looking at the political spectrum to understand economic issues and social issues and typically what the left and the right believe in, conservative and progressive. And so on the quadrant, the four-quadrant spectrum as opposed to just the linear spectrum. And we've also started talking about where they might fit on that political spectrum. So there's a vote compass that adults can do, and there's also a youth vote compass that gives some additional information. So students are able to learn a little bit more about the issues when they're responding. And they see also where they line up with some of the political parties.
And we know one thing that keeps coming up as we have these conversations is the confusion that many Canadians have between the Canadian system and our cousins down south in the American system, because we're exposed to that so often. And you mentioned you started by talking to your students about the American one. You see any of that confusion in your own classroom?
Sure. At the beginning, they really didn't know the difference. They were really not familiar with the Canadian system. And I think, in the fall, they were able to parse it out. But certainly it is a little bit tricky when you're thinking, we're going to vote directly for the Prime Minister, since in the U.S. they get to vote directly for the President.
Now we want to break things down for people, especially for low propensity voters or people who may be hesitant voters or first-time voters, and really define some terms and let people know what it is they're doing when they walk into that ballot box, and some terms people will hear and what they mean and why they're important. So one of them, of course, is first past the post. You'll hear this a lot when political figures or pundits are talking. How does that work in our system?
So when we go to vote, we're actually voting for the candidate who we feel will best represent our values in our own riding. And the candidate who wins will be the candidate who got the most votes. So even if it's just one vote more than the other candidate, that person wins. And that's first past the post. And that term comes from horse racing, where even if you're a split second behind the other horse, you lose. So in this case, it would be the candidate. Just a couple of votes can make a difference. Every vote counts.
And a really big, important part of our system here, because you're not just going to have two candidates in every riding. Of course, sometimes you have multiple candidates in every riding. So there are times when that person is going to win the election without actually getting more than 50% of the vote.
Exactly. Very, very different than in other systems.
And let's talk about the other part of that, speaking of getting 50% plus one, and that is the actual governments that we elect in Canada, because we have different kinds of government that we can elect here based on seat counts and all sorts of things. So let's talk about the difference between the majority and the minority government and what that actually means.
Every party is hoping to win a majority, because if they win a majority, it means pretty much whatever they want is going to go through. So to win a majority, you need to win at least 50% plus one of the ridings, or the equivalent of having 50% plus one of the seats in Parliament. So this year we have 343 ridings, so I believe that means we have to win at least, the party has to win at least 172 seats. Then they have the majority. if a party wins fewer than 172 seats, but they still win more than any of the other parties, then they are going to be in what's called a minority government. So they didn't achieve the 50% plus one, but they still had more seats than any of the other parties, and so they are invited to form the government.
Now, we really do want to find out what people know or do not know about the Canadian political system, and so we sent our cameras out to chat with some folks. In fact, before a Habs game right here in Montreal, I want to stress and cannot stress enough that there are no stupid answers here. This is really all about getting information, finding out what people do know and what they need to know.
When we talk about a majority government, what does that mean, a majority government?
To my understanding, it just means that the government that was voted in took the majority of the seats.
It means that the government that got the majority of the seats or the ridings, right? I don't know the exact number, I got to be honest with you, but it means that you've collected the most ridings within all the available ridings in Canada, so you can vote on what you want and win.
Probably a government that just has a majority of the votes of the people of the like each county, and they can take more decisions, make more decisions by themselves without needing other parties to get involved.
Basically, it's two parties that are going to have to work together to make the policies right here in Canada.
Right.
You know, and there's a lot of turmoil in our government. Not as bad as USA right now, but you know, a majority government. We're just going to have two parties that are going to have to work together over the next several years.
Girl, I don't know.
I'm asking hard questions. Hockey, and then I'm like, government.
What's your reaction to some of those answers and the fact that people were really close?
Yeah, I was impressed. Just needed to explain that you have to have more than half of the seats in order to have a majority government.
You teach civics and the like here at Trafalgar, and the students you teach are, as we were saying, you know, they may not be voting in this next election, but they may be voting in the one after that. How important is it to dive into this stuff as early as possible as well in life to get people thinking about these things maybe earlier on and thinking about them in a different way?
So, well, you often hear about the different barriers to voting, and some adults even are nervous about the voting process and how that works. And so it's really important for students to start young and to go through almost the exact same motions that a regular voter would go through. So our student body, we have them come to a desk. They have to, this year we're adding the extra feature of having them present a student ID, and then they have to get their name crossed off. They get the ballot. They're shown how they need to fold the ballot. They go to a separate area where it's, you know, private. We have the same type of screens provided by, well, Civics and Elections Canada, and then they get to vote and make their decision and then bring their ballot back and put it in the box and know that they are doing exactly what, you know, hundreds of thousands and millions of Canadians are doing at the same time. The learning that happens in class, it's meaningful to a certain extent, but to make it really real, I think it's important to bring in the actual candidates who can speak to them directly and hear from them, hear their concerns, hear their questions, and answer their questions as well. And hearing the candidates, they're going to be given a chance to think like, I'm not quite sure I agree with what that candidate said, and then ask a question to dig deeper or a follow-up question. And I agree, that definitely builds their critical thinking skills. I also really strive to help them develop those skills through other types of lessons, such as looking at political ads and breaking them down and seeing what is it in those ads that is making us either like a candidate or dislike a candidate. And also, since most of our students are getting their news either from their parents or from social media, it's really important for them to think critically and make decisions for themselves and think, is this a reliable source? I mean, with their parents, for sure, I think there's a lot of confidence they have in their parents, but they also might have a slight differences in values that might make a difference. And then from social media, for sure, what you're getting on TikTok or from an influencer, you know, you have to take a second and think about what is their motive, what is their agenda, and that is something also that civics lessons help students think about.